After successfully logging into the IVG, the driver opens the Hours of Service application and sees the Status tab. At the top are the remaining hours before the driver goes into violation for any Hours of Service rule and the name of the driver whose records are displayed. If there is a co-driver logged into the IVG, that driver can be selected. To ensure driver security when there's a co-driver logged in, at any time either driver wants to view logs, the driver is prompted to re-enter a password. A green dot indicates the active driver. A gray dot indicates the inactive driver. Next to the driver's name is the current DOT, MOT in Canada, date and remaining hours until the driver goes into violation. If your company uses the workflow or vehicle inspection report applications, the driver can jump to those applications from almost any screen in Hours of Service. The driver may see messages showing the log status. Log update in progress, not current logs. Review and approve your logs. When the driver's logs are sent for approval, the driver sees the second message. The status screen shows how many hours the driver will gain over the next 2 days. Have your drivers use this information to determine if a 34-hour reset is needed. The Status tab also displays the current duty status and information about that status. To edit remarks on the current status, the driver taps Remarks. To change status, the driver taps Change. Here the driver taps a different duty status. The available duty statuses are based on if this is the active or inactive driver and what features are enabled for drivers. You can define a list of remarks that a driver can specify or allow the driver to type a remark to describe what occurred during that status. If typing a remark, the driver taps in the text box and types on the pop-up keyboard. When finished, the driver closes the keyboard and taps OK. In this example, the driver is now in off-duty status. If you enabled clock in and clock out for your drivers, they may account for on-duty time away from the truck. Clock in is before the driver began driving, such as attending an early driver meeting. Clock out is used at the end of the driver's shift, such as completing paperwork in the office. When clocking in, the driver enters the time the shift began. The driver taps the arrows to the right of the posted clock-in time to adjust the start time, then selects 1 or 2 remarks, or if available, types a remark to describe what happened during the status. When done, the driver closes the keyboard and taps OK. The clock out function works similarly, and the driver identifies when the shift ends. The Summary tab graphically shows the 4 main clocks available to the driver. The shortest bar indicates the Hours of Service rules that is next to go into violation. The Clocks tab displays only if you specified on your contract that you would like to run rule sets other than the default US rules. If you're running multiple rule sets, this tab shows a summary of the driver's hours for the current duty cycle. The Hours of Service application does not automatically identify when a state or international border was crossed. While the driver is pulled over during a border crossing inspection, the driver must tap Border to indicate manually that there is a border crossing. The driver can also tap Region to identify the rule set being used. The Graph tab graphically represents the driver's duty status for the current day. The information on this tab is view only, and from here the driver can see information about the selected day. The driver selects a duty status to see any remarks entered for it. The Daily Log tab shows the driver's daily duty status logs as a list. The driver can scroll among days, view info about an entry, or select duty statuses to see company info or any remarks about a duty status. During a roadside inspection, the driver can send e-rods if requested, show the inspector mode which displays different information than the default driver view, and show the header that provides additional details for the inspector. The Duty Cycle tab, named for the US or Canadian duty cycle the driver is running under, shows a daily sum of mileage, driving time, and on-duty time. Further details are shown under the Vehicle Info. From here, the driver can request the latest duty status logs from the server. The Certify tab is where the driver would view, edit, and certify logs. For more information on editing logs, see the Driver Log Edits video. The Load tab is where the driver would enter load information and view current and historical load information. If your company has integration with a dispatch application or workflow, this information may be pre-filled and the driver doesn't have to do any manual entry for each load being hauled. Because load information is a federal requirement, if no information is entered about the load, the driver is prompted to enter load information the following day or face a form and manner violation. If there was no load while the driver was driving, the driver may enter any characters in the load ID and use bobtail or deadhead for trailer number. The Carriers tab should display the carrier information as entered in the Hours of Service back-office application. The Carriers tab and Carrier Setup in Hours of Service do not identify separate companies the driver may haul for, just divisions of a single company, like bulk versus refrigerated, or hazmat versus DITS, Defense Department Tracking System. If your company has multiple divisions that are their own carrier entities, you would enter those in the Hours of Service back-office application, and the driver would select the carrier here. The driver uses the IVG to communicate with your dispatch office. Depending on how your IVG is configured, the driver can exchange information with your dispatch office, view videos, hear audio files, and download PDFs, surf the internet, log in and use Hours of Service, navigate among various stops. IVGs notify the driver that new information was received by displaying a message on the screen, illuminating a light on the unit, sounding an alert.
A new message has arrived.
Drivers interact with the IVG by tapping the active area on the screen, pushing buttons on the IVG. Be aware that to eliminate driver distraction, many applications on the IVG are not accessible when the wheels are turning. Only after the vehicle is stopped can the driver begin using those applications. Because some applications on the IVG need to know the driver's ID, the driver must log into the IVG using the login you created in Omnitracs. To begin, the driver goes to the home screen and taps Driver Login. The driver types a driver ID and password, and if logging in as the second driver, identifies as the active or inactive driver. The driver closes the keyboard and taps OK. The driver is then prompted to identify a duty status and tap OK. A driver's duty status in Hours of Service is different from being logged into the IVG. Logging in identifies the driver as being in the vehicle, and the person doing the driving must be identified as the active driver. The active driver Hours of Service logs are updated during the course of the day. Be aware that changing the login status from active to inactive does not put the driver into an off-duty status. Drivers must maintain accurate Hours of Service duty status logs by using the Hours of Service application to manually change duty status, verify log changes from the back office, and certify logs daily. When the driver logs in, the DOT or MOT clock begins to count down to the next violation, and the driver's login ID displays until the ID and password are confirmed over the air. When the login is confirmed, the driver's full name displays. When two drivers are in the cab, one driver is active and the other driver is inactive. For additional driver security, when there is a driver and co-driver logged into the IVG, there is a password challenge when the co-driver attempts to view or edit logs. To log in a second driver, go to the home screen and tap Driver Login. Then tap Add. Type the second driver's ID and password, close the keyboard, identify as the active or inactive driver, then tap OK. The driver is then prompted to identify a duty status and tap OK. To swap active drivers, select the inactive driver and tap Change. Tap OK. Enter that driver's password, close the keyboard, and tap OK. Now the second driver is the active driver. To log out, the driver goes to the home screen, taps Driver Login, Log Out, identifies a logged out status, and taps Log Out. In most cases, drivers maintain their logs by manually identifying duty status changes as they occur, or the IVG puts them into the appropriate duty status automatically. Only if a driver selects the wrong duty status, the carrier makes edits, or the driver forgets to change duty status, will the driver need to edit logs. For the process on how to edit logs, see the Driver Log Edits video. When logging into the IVG, the driver is identified as the active driver and selects a duty status. When a co-driver logs in, they identify as active or inactive before selecting a duty status. The active driver is automatically placed into driving duty status when the wheels move, and is prompted to drop into on duty when the wheels stop. When logging off, the driver is prompted to pick a final duty status. Between those events, the driver may also need to manually identify duty status changes. The most common will be the 30-minute rest break. The driver must keep an eye on the DOT clock to stay in compliance. As soon as the driver logs into the IVG, the clock starts counting down to the soonest violation. The Summary tab shows all applicable hours of service clocks counting down. The lowest number in the Available column indicates what rule is next to go into violation. As the driver approaches 8 hours on-duty time, drivers must take a rest break that is greater than 30 minutes long. To do so, the driver opens the Hours of Service application to the Status tab and taps Change. The driver taps Off Duty. If remarks are required, the driver can enter or select Remarks and tap OK. Until the driver is off duty for more than 30 minutes, the driver cannot select an on-duty status. Be aware that if the driver is on break and the wheels move for any reason, the driver is automatically bumped into driving status and will need to restart the brake or be in violation. If the driver were off duty and using personal conveyance, the driver opens the Hours of Service application to the Status tab and taps Change. The driver taps Off Duty and taps Personal Conveyance. All other duty status changes are performed as for the 30-minute rest break. The driver just needs to select the appropriate duty status and leave remarks if required. Drivers are required to keep their duty status logs up to date and certify them every 24 hours. When drivers are stopped by a DOT or MOT officer, drivers can expect that, in addition to a possible vehicle inspection, they must present their driver's license, medical card and waiver, hazmat requirements, and other materials including current daily logs and hours of service. Drivers should have the ELD guide available and accessible in cab as the inspector may request to see it. This guide is a set of instructions on how to share or transfer your logs to an inspection officer. If stopped for an inspection while using the Omnitracs Hours of Service application, the driver will open the Hours of Service application and navigate to the Graph tab. Hand the IVG to the inspector through the driver's window. Provide the ELD guide. If the inspector requests electronic copies of the logs, the driver must navigate to the Daylog tab and tap eRods. Select Web Services or Email. Enter any comments and tap Send. Personal conveyance, previously known as off-duty driving, is a special case of the off-duty status that, if allowed by your company, lets you manually identify time that you generate while off-duty as personal conveyance. Your company may allow unlimited personal conveyance or limit it to a number of minutes. If your company limits the length of personal conveyance, you'll receive an alert on the IVG that indicates that you're exceeding your company's personal conveyance threshold, but you are not automatically dropped into drive duty status. If available, you change your duty status to off-duty and flag it as personal conveyance. You must enter remarks about the duty status. Close the keyboard and tap OK. While you are in personal conveyance, the GPS resolution for your location is reported to the nearest 10 miles, 16 kilometers. Be aware that your company may have set up automatic notification so that someone is alerted when you enter personal conveyance. When drive time accumulates as personal conveyance or yard move, it is indicated on the Graph tab as a different color, not on a separate line. Be sure to manually terminate personal conveyance when you're done moving. Every 24 hours, your drivers must review and certify their logs. When drivers initially log on to the IVG, they cannot edit or certify logs while the hours of service application is synchronizing with the server and must wait for the Review and Approve Logs message to appear. For ELDs, if the driver has carrier edits, the driver is prompted to review and certify them after logging into the IVG. The driver sees the carrier edits prompt and taps Review Carrier Edits. The driver can reject or confirm those edits, and if accepted, the driver may certify those logs. If the driver rejects the carrier edits, the driver must enter a reason for rejecting the edits. For both ELDs and AOBRDs, drivers certify logs in 24-hour increments, not multiple days at a time. Be sure your drivers are aware that both certified and uncertified logs for their full duty cycle are accessible on the Certify tab. If the driver is certifying without being prompted, as part of the normal log review and certification process, from the IVG's home screen, the driver taps Hours of Service, and on the Certify tab, taps the arrows on the top right to scroll to a specific date. A check mark indicates a certified record. An exclamation point indicates there was a system or sensor failure when the log was recorded. If a record is incorrect, the driver taps the record, then taps Edit. If the driver is changing the original duty status to another, the driver selects the new duty status and a predefined remark, or types a remark to describe what happened during the status. The driver closes the keyboard and taps Next. If the driver needed to do more complex editing, like the driver never logged a day-long meeting, the driver will need to perform 2 edits to split and change the duty statuses. In this example, the driver would select the duty status that's in error, tap Edit, and tap Split to divide the 24-hour off-duty status. The duty status is split in half, and both segments have the same status and location. The driver selects a status, time, and location for the new duty status, and adds remarks to explain activities during that duty status. When finished, the driver taps Next, types the reason for editing the status, and taps Save. At this point, the driver must make an additional change to this log and so taps Not Ready. Then the driver repeats the split, duty status and time updates, adds remarks, and taps Next. The driver types a reason for the edit and taps Save. Now that the day is up to date, the driver taps Certify. The driver should do a final review of this day's logs, and if they're correct, tap Agree. The driver's logs for this day are now certified and show a green check mark next to each duty status. When you use the Hours of Service application to edit logs for a driver using an ELD, they're listed as pending until the driver approves the status changes, and they're updated as part of the driver's logs of record. The driver sees a pop-up and must review the carrier edits. The driver can either reject or confirm the proposed edits. If the driver rejects the edits, they're no longer listed as pending and revert to what they were before you made the changes. When the driver confirms the change, the driver is prompted to certify the logs for that day. When the driver agrees, the logs are updated over the air and the change is no longer listed as pending. You must ensure that your load and carrier information is accurate, or risk a form and manner violation. To help avoid a violation, Hours of Service prompts you to enter any missing required information when logging out. If your company has integration with a dispatch application or the workflow application, load information may be preloaded and you don't have to manually enter each load being hauled. To enter information, tap Load. Tap New Load. Type a load ID. Verify or update your start and end dates. Type a bill of lading. Type a trailer ID. Tap to close the keyboard and tap OK. If you weren't hauling a load, you may enter any characters for the load ID and use bobtail or deadhead for the trailer number. As always, ensure what you enter on your official logs of record is both accurate and complies with your company's procedures. If you haul for multiple divisions of a single company, like bulk versus refrigerated, you're required to identify that division under Carriers. To enter carrier information, tap the Carriers tab. Select the carrier and tap OK. Unassigned Vehicle Activity, or UVA, is drive time that accumulates with no active driver logged in to the IVG. If any unassigned drive time accumulates on an IVG, the next driver to log in is prompted to claim ownership of that drive time. If you reject the drive time, your company's back-office personnel must manually assign it to a driver. Back-office personnel periodically review reports to identify and resolve instances of UVA. If the back-office assigns UVA to you, you must review and certify or reject that change. You'll see a notification when you log in notifying you that the carrier edited your logs, and you can review those changes before you certify your hours. To avoid generating UVA, be sure to log in to the IVG at the start of your day and verify that your full name resolves indicating your login was successful. If you have a co-driver, be sure to indicate that you are the active driver while you are driving.